It's been a little over 12 months since I picked up the Sony a7 IV, and I've been using it for almost anything photography and videography related that I can think of. And honestly, if there's one thing I've learned in my time using the a7 IV, it's how wrong I was about this camera and any preconceived notions I had when I first purchased it. So in this video, we're going to talk about my long-term review of the Sony a7 IV and why, yes, even as an a7S III and a7R5 owner, this, being the a7 IV, might truly be the perfect camera for you. So to start, let's talk about the photo capabilities of this camera. With the a7 IV, you're getting a 33 megapixel sensor, which, yes, while I didn't initially know it at the time, I think Sony has found and struck the perfect balance between quality, clear images, and dynamic range. Yes, of course, if you're working with cameras like Sony's S-series line, you're dealing with cameras that have lower megapixel counts that just aren't particularly well suited, at least for certain photographic situations. But counter that with cameras with much higher megapixel counts like Sony's R-series line, and now you're also having some trade-offs between dynamic range and low light capability. On the photo side, I've been really impressed by what 33 megapixels offers, not just at its native full-frame resolution. This includes being able to crop into photos much more than I ever could, say, with my a7 III, but also having the ability to still leverage a high-quality 15 megapixel image at its APS-C crop sensor size. Of course, the megapixel count and crop mode aren't the only things that benefit this camera photo-wise. The a7 IV was the first camera in Sony's lineup to offer the lossless compressed large, medium, and small compression option types when you're shooting raw photos. And so yes, not only can you leverage the quality of that sensor in its full frame and APS-C size, but you can still get high-quality images using the full width of the sensor in RAW in much smaller file sizes. This is ideal for certain shooting situations like real estate, where you know you're going to have to likely compress the images either in camera or in post to even make it to the multiple listing service site and their stringent requirements. And yes, I do have a full video on real estate photography using the a7 IV as a basis for that I will leave a link to above and in the description below that I would encourage you to check out. But yes, I've been using the a7 IV now in a number of different photographic situations. Having some of the latest autofocus technology in Sony's cameras, even if it's not the quote-unquote AI-based version that the a7R5 contains, still means that this camera is producing excellent results for photography. I use a mixture of autofocus single shot and autofocus continuous for most of my photo work. In other cases, I found the accuracy and hit rate to be remarkably good, and this includes doing high frame rate bursts using the camera's mechanical shutter because yes, in compressed RAW, you can get up to 10 frames per second shooting in this camera. Of course, from the photography side too, being able to benefit from this camera's ergonomics and having a larger extended grip and just feeling better in the hands than many of Sony's previous models. But the photo side of this camera really only tells a partial story, because I think there is frankly even more to talk about when it comes to the video capabilities of the a7 IV. So I will still say I am more so a videographer than photographer when it comes to the different gigs that I do. And yes, one of the most common gigs that I frequently do is weddings. And I do have a review on this channel of the a7 IV for wedding filmmakers that I will leave a link to above and in the description below that I would highly encourage you to check out if you're ever considering using this camera for those situations. But as a videographer, I cover a lot more than just weddings, and frankly, there is so much to talk about when it comes to the a7 IV's video capabilities. The summary of video features for the a7 IV is the fact that I think for a fraction of the cost of a camera like the a7S III or FX3, you are getting roughly 90 to 95% of what those cameras can do. Yes, that includes a camera sensor that accommodates up to 15 plus stops of dynamic range, all of the latest Sony picture profiles including S-Cinetone, which I use a fair amount of, and S-Log3, all of the latest Sony codecs in XAVCS, XAVC-SI, and XAVC-HS, and the ability to shoot 10-bit 422 video, having Steady Shot active for being able to get smooth handheld footage, having those latest improvements in Sony's autofocus system, which truly helps for those of us that use it on a day-to-day basis, having a long-lasting and consistent battery life like many of Sony's newer cameras that utilize the NP-FC100 battery, having a flip screen for video, which is pretty much a requirement at this point for almost any modern camera, and yes, the ability to shoot up to 4K 60 frames per second, which is one of the key differentiators that separates this from many of Sony's older cameras that only shot up to 4K 30 frames per second. Now on top of this, you're also getting features that cameras like the a7S III at the time of recording this video still don't have. And that includes crucial features like breathing compensation, variable shutter, focus map, and yes, of course, the fact that you can now shoot in APS-C crop mode up to 4K 30 frames per second. And as nice as the 7K downsampled image that you're getting with the full width of the sensor is, which yes, I find to be a beautiful, pleasing image, I truly get a ton of use out of the 15 megapixel APS-C image that you get when you're utilizing crop mode. And this is something that, apart from being able to utilize APS-C lenses with your camera easily, also just lets you get a little bit of extra reach out of your lenses when you need it to. And yes, it's been one of those things that I really do appreciate having in certain situations. But in all that I've talked about with the a7 IV up to this point, that doesn't account for what I got wrong about this camera. Because yes, the a7 IV is not a perfect camera, as there's really no such thing as a perfect camera, but many of those faults and flaws that are well known that I expected would impede my day-to-day use of it really have not been as much of a factor as I thought they would be. So let's just jump into it. Yes, the rolling shutter on this camera is not going to perform nearly as well as a camera like the a7S III or FX3 with a much lower megapixel count and faster sensor readout. But are you someone that's doing fast whip pans in your typical day-to-day shooting situations? I'm honestly not, and I can't say that in any of the work I've shot this camera in, I've noticed any major issues with it. Yes, the a7 IV also does not provide the low light capabilities that you would get with a camera like the a7S III or FX3. But yes, its ISO performance of 800 and 3200 in S-Log3, which I have a separate video on this channel about that you can check out, offers a surprising amount of low light capability that even surpasses Sony's now cinema line cameras like the FX30. And frankly, as some of my test shooting situations have shown, you can still get clean, low noise images well above 3200 ISO. Yes, this camera only contains one card slot that supports CF Express Type A and UHS-2 SD cards, but this frankly doesn't matter given the camera supports shooting in all of its different frame rates, resolutions, and codecs using only UHS-2 SD cards, which my video on memory cards for the a7 IV outlines among many other things. Yes, this camera shoots 4K 60 only in its APS-C crop mode, but frankly if you own one or more slightly wider lenses, so long as you're keeping track of the fact that a full frame lens like a 24-70 is really more like a 36-105, or your 16-35 is more like a 24-52.5, or you could just get an APS-C lens designed for a wider field of view. Yes, certain shooting situations like real estate video might require you to think a bit more about this, but frankly, unless you need really ultra-wide angles regularly, this is probably not going to be as much of an issue as you might think. But yes, this camera is not what I would technically call a 4K 60 continuous shooting camera, meaning you cannot expect to record for very elongated times in 4K 60 like you can in other certain Sony cameras like the a7S III or FX3. Because yes, as I have found in certain hotter environments or just elongated shooting situations in general, at roughly around the 45-minute to an hour mark, this camera will overheat if you're shooting in 4K 60 frames per second. Now, its recovery time from this is relatively quick, but it might also beg the question of how much of an issue this could be in terms of your ability to shoot 4K 60. And even though I will admit this is a limitation, this is again another case where I was wrong about this camera. So let's talk about the weekend that surprised me. A few months ago, I encountered a shooting situation where I was covering a triple header of weddings across a Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, all part of an elongated series of wedding events for one couple. So yes, Saturday was a typical American-style wedding where I was doing videography for the couple and going through all the motions as you would expect in a classic wedding of that type. Bride prep, groom prep, first look, a typical ceremony, a classic reception with dancing, and so on. Sunday was a more traditional Indian luncheon with a haldi ceremony where I was the sole person covering this as a photographer. And on Monday, I was again playing the role of a videographer, but this time for the Indian wedding. So yes, covering everything from the barat or groom's procession all the way through an elongated ceremony to a reception that included a lot, and I do mean a lot, of dancing and then some. And yes, to add even another separate element to this, for that same couple, 3 weeks prior, there was a small intimate wedding reception where I played the role of, yes, a photographer and videographer quite literally simultaneously. 1 second taking photos of a couple using on-camera flash, to the next recording video clips of that exact same moment. And yes, the one common thread between all these different events was the fact that the Sony a7 IV was my main camera for each and every one of these. In fact, it was the sole camera being used for each of these photography situations and was easily my lead camera, getting 80 to 90% of the footage in each of those videography situations. In both of those videography cases, there was a lot of 4K 60 footage, and in fact, in the Indian wedding on Monday, I captured nearly the entire thing in 4K 60 using the a7 IV. Any of the limitations on the 4K 60 side when it comes to overheating actually were not a major factor. Now, I did have to bear this in mind when shooting 4K 60, of course, making sure I roughly stopped the camera 30 to 45 minutes in when I was shooting a clip, just to give it a slight break. And as much as I generally had my doubts about these different concerns over time, it proved itself in one of the most challenging and difficult situations that you could ask of any single hybrid camera, and it did so essentially flawlessly. When I purchased the a7 IV, I expected this to be a B or C camera body, essentially a second or third or a backup when I needed it in certain photo or video situations. But where I was wrong was truly how capable this camera not just could be as an A body, but just frankly is. I think for a lot of people, this camera is going to be more than enough than you would need, certainly on the photo side, but also on the video side. Again, if the work that you do entails very fast whip pans, extreme low light situations, or extremely long continuous shooting situations in 4K 60, then sure, maybe the a7 IV isn't for you. But as a run-and-gun videographer and photographer that covers almost any type of gig and situation that you could conceive of, this camera's not only met, but really exceeded my expectations in terms of what it can do. And in fact, to just be completely real, I think if this camera shot full-frame 4K 60 video and could do so continuously, I probably wouldn't have a need for my a7S III, and I might not even have a need for my Sony a7R V. And honestly, I would be comfortable replacing each of those bodies with an a7 IV. So in summary, what are my thoughts on the Sony a7 IV? This camera is just a lot more capable than I thought it would be. I truly think if you're a photographer ranging anywhere from a hobbyist with some money to spend to a professional doing most kinds of work, save maybe for shots that might end up on billboards or high-action sports, a camera like the a7 IV is probably not just a great addition to whatever Sony kit you might have today, but quite frankly, you could build out an entire fleet of these from scratch and have a robust body for shooting photos for years and years to come. And yes, when it comes down to the video side of things, it is really probably going to come down to those elongated recording times in 4K 60 as to whether this will be a suitable body for you. I've managed to get a ton, and I do mean a ton, of 4K 60 footage with this camera in real-world paid shooting situations. That may not be suitable in every situation, but that could be just enough or even more than enough video camera that you need compared to some of other Sony's video models that might offer a bit more features but also certainly cost a fair amount more. All in all, yes, even though I own a more video-centric body in the a7S III, and a photo, but yes, also even video-centric body to an extent with the a7R V, the a7 IV is a camera that has truly earned its place in Sony's lineup, and offers a wealth of features for a price point that is a good amount less than many of its larger siblings. And so if you need a full-frame hybrid that does it all, truly the Sony a7 IV should still be on, and arguably at the top of your list. So that is my long-term take on the Sony a7 IV. Hopefully this video has been of some help to you. Feel free to leave a like and subscribe if it has. A lot more to talk about with Sony cameras on this channel, and a range of different videos on that topic already that I would definitely encourage you to check out. For now, that is all I have to say, so thanks for watching.